What does it say?
It says live, Ita creativity and streaming 1657 kappa bytes per second. It says a lot of yes, good. Let's stay because it's stabilizing still. There is a delay of like
40 seconds.
at least 40 seconds.
We can switch it off if you.
Super loud. Do you think we can turn it down?
Yeah, just let's
turn it off.
Yeah.
Or put it not so loud. No.
Okay. Okay. Hello and welcome again to Myymälä2 Gallery for a live stream of Akbar Mehta's exhibition, Is There a Room with Just a Color? And today we're going to talk about digital creativity and entanglement. And we welcome all questions, so if you have any questions, please send them to us and we will try to do our best to answer. And yeah, let's start going. I hear a sound somewhere which needs to be turned off. I will go turn it off. So,
That's what's known as a digital feedback loop.
yes, digital entanglement, getting mixed up with digital stuff. So, yeah, when you asked, so let's not talk about the exhibition as such yet, but let's kind of like deal with the exhibition while we talk.
Sure.
You suggested that we talk about something, and I suggested digital creativity, to which you added entanglement.
Yes.
Why? What is entanglement in terms of digitality, or how is it a good term to be entangled, for example?
Well, we can decide whether it's a good term maybe at the end of the talk. But I think the idea of creativity and the idea of the digital are both on their own, but also together as digital creativity, are a very complicated and entangled term today, and a very complicated or problematized concept in today's term. So I just felt that we couldn't really talk about digital creativity without maybe going into the ways in which they are entangled terms.
I mean, when we talk about digital creativity, it's kind of, maybe it's a good idea to say, let's talk about what it is. You know, what is digital creativity? How is it different to any other type of creativity? I mean, for me, working digitally for I don't know, 10, 15 years, quite a lot, I've noticed that a lot of it's to do with technical problems, solving issues, and being collaborative.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that many people forget when they think about digital creativity. You see a stream or something and you just think of the performance, but there's so many other people working in the background and doing the technical aspects, doing the sound, doing the visions, images, and all sorts of things. So I think for me it's always interesting to see how social this creativity, which we deem to be kind of personal, and now in coronavirus you're isolated. We imagine it as this isolation of creativity, when in fact all digital work is highly collaborative. And sorry.
No, not to cut, but no, I mean I completely get this sense, and this is perhaps in a way, something that I also realized or felt that I am in this space when I started working with technology. And one of the first things that I really started doing was using Photoshop as a alternate site for image making. So digital paintings were really unknown in 2002, 2003 in India, in the art school that I was in, or in any of the artist circles that I found myself in. And one of the first things that, or the first response that you would get is, oh, okay, you are making images on using software. So the software is doing everything, right? So you just like, it's almost as if, okay, you just hit this button and called design or paint, and it happens. So this this idea of on one hand not knowing what digital tools really can do for an artistic practice, and on the other hand to really it was frustrating for me to find myself in a space, in a social and artistic space where the tools of that I had chosen weren't really looked at or understood as legitimate or credible tools in which to do artistic practice. And from that point onwards of doing digital paintings using a tablet and Photoshop, to doing coding, to doing interactive archival practices, to even looking at photography, video as in ways that I am looking at it, and not in ways that perhaps are generally looked at. I have always found this sense of resistance to technology. And for me, it's something that I don't really understand, because I feel that the digital is the tool of our times. It is, and it is also what's the word? It's such a significant shift from anything that we may be using before the digital really comes in, that it's almost the first use of the brush and paint, or the shift from tempera to and fresco to canvas, or the invention of the camera. So the use of the digital actually is as fundamental and intervention into artistic practice as any of these major changes, but it is not looked at as that. So I think that is in a part one of the aspects of what it means to be entangled in it.
One of the things I think which your work does and many other digital works don't do is that it deals with data in a participatory way, where you are everybody who is part of the audience is invited to participate in creation of the data, which is the information and the backbone of all digital art. And so how did you come about that? I mean, I'm very interested. You said a few things I was interested in, but I'm kind of curious about how you came to your practice of this archival digital materials and participatory digital works.
I think the first thing that is important for me is to continue to look at archiving as an artistic practice, and as that component of my being, or that as an artist I do want some kind of reciprocation. So I think in that sense I would not really call myself an archivist. That I'm not interested in only archiving material and archiving data, and although I'm very interested in archival structures, in data structures, how things can be organized, how do we collect information, and how can we create a system that is accessible. I'm interested in all of those things, but I think as an artist and as an artist who's very interested in engaging with the politicality of our times and engaging with the people and having that reciprocity, what happens is that the kind of archives that I'm making or the kind of archives I'm interested in making aren't it's not information or knowledge that has existed. It's stuff that is in the process of being created, and in that sense, I think the participatory element it becomes even more important. And so, what happens is then how the question becomes: how does one create these systems in which, for people, they find themselves wanting to immerse themselves in, wanting to become a part of the process or a part of the structure, and in a way it is also about creating that sense of accessibility and almost this idea of co-archiving rather than just simply being participants.
Yeah. I mean, this idea of wanting to participate in something is really nice. One of the things I've been thinking about recently a lot are games, video games, and I've kind of I've gone through this phase of changing my social media to basically just video games, where I play video games with other people. Instead of hanging out on Facebook, I hang out in Minecraft, and we chat and we do but it seems it's very kind of similar, but at the same time the activities you do and the physical activities, as a researcher of haptics and touch and these things, for me the activity of playing a video game is so different to scrolling. The physical touch of it is so different that it brings a variety to the action of the social digital action, which I think maybe I've been craving for. And I was looking at the website and thinking about how that is kind of like this sort of participatory platform for the same type of digital creativity I feel when I'm playing video games. Of course, we're talking about something which is not really a game. The discussion of violence, I'm not a big fan of violent video games, and I don't, whatever that means. I mean, it's not, to participate in violence in many ways is very difficult. I mean, of course, there are some interesting things that you can look at when you're participating in violence, but whether or not you want to is, of course, a good start. But so, how do you feel this idea of a platform, that you've created a platform actually, a website which is a platform for I wouldn't say subversive political action, but there is something about the way the website works which is a game, but at the same time it plays with something very serious.
Yeah, I mean, I think the analogy is quite apt, because the entire structure in a way is very reminiscent of the early Moo or mud platforms. And Moo and mud platforms were these, now I don't remember the full form, it's motion object oriented games, I think, or I could be mistaken. I'm very bad with this. Okay. So those games were essentially translations of what you would otherwise do in the early 80s. Is you would read a book that had certain instructions, and based on certain decisions that you made, you would actually further the narrative of the story. And that was in a way essentially how the first text-based or chat room games were developed. So it had nothing except maybe instructions, and you could play only by something as simple as yes or no. But the main component of these games was your imagination. So there were no graphics, there was no high definition visual experience, none of that. But this is the way actually online games really started working. And I'm very interested in things or games like Paper Clips or Papers, Please, where the idea or these thick games, which are again very simple versions of other visual spectacles that we are used to. But what interests me in these kind of games is a certain kind of cerebral quality of thinking and engaging with the subject, which really is at the core of it. So on one hand, yes, there are a lot of these games that become kind of the foundations of inspiration and moving forward. But then on the other hand, it's also, the project is also kind of taking off from the late 90s, early 2000 instructional art projects like Solve-It or there's so many out there. So, but here the instructional art as a platform becomes so complex and ongoing that it's not just a set of simple instructions. It's actually pulling you into its own stream of thought process, and you follow it down the rabbit hole. So it's taking the instructional art genre and really building upon it.
Yeah, making an actual work out of
Yeah.
these instructions. Yeah, that's interesting. I think one of the things about live streaming is that you can't really stop and think. Because I feel like sometimes it's really nice to kind of just sit down and think and wait a second. But maybe we have to continue very quickly. But I think it's nice to also be a bit reflective. I mean, considering we're talking about digital creativity, to also think about the situation in which we are talking about the creativity and being in the space in this and so forth. I mean, that's kind of like a preamble. I like to ramble in this.
No, but I mean, while you're thinking of this, maybe I can also say that I think I found it very ironical that as a project, 256 Million Colors of Violence has been always about moving beyond geographical constraints and reaching out to audiences across different platforms across the globe. How we navigate these online structures, whether it's social media or live stream or anything like that, of course, there is still a matter of a certain kind of knowledge that you require, or you have to have the know-how in order to navigate it. But
that's a great point, because there's a great amount of privilege involved in digital creativity and digital work. I mean,
but it was always a project that was meant to be experienced online. So for us to be able to do a project or to show it in this way, where there is no choice except to see everything online. So what does it mean then for a project that was not designed to be a COVID-19 online project?
Yeah, exactly.
It was designed to be a post-specific political events in 2008, 2009 onwards project. That it's actually been something that's been going on since 2016 in different ways, and now we find ourselves in a situation where this may be, and we may be forced to accept that this may be a part of the new normal. So what does it mean then? The question of digital creativity in how we then understand all creativity. I mean, digital creativity actually as a term also comes from, or it became digital creativity when we started making a distinction between creativity offline and creativity involving the use of digital tools. But now when most of our tools are digital, what does that differentiation even mean?
But I think a lot of people have been exploring these questions. I mean, the digital world, like you said, these games started in the 80s. The first exhibitions about online art, internet art, started in the 80s, 90s. And a lot of people have been working with these ideas. And all of a sudden we have this situation where we are forced, like you said, to all of a sudden accept a new normal where this is just the way everything has to be now. And sometimes, when I came to this discussion, or to set up and to build up all these things, I started thinking about how strange it is that we are now pushing for a digital leap, in a sense, like 30 years later.
Yeah.
That this rhetoric all of a sudden and hyperbole is all over the place, where people are saying like, okay, now is the time to do it, and you're like, well, I've been doing this for decades. You know, I've been doing digital art. I did my first digital artwork in around 2008, 2009, 2010, and like for 10 years I've been working in digital and found lots of problems and actually kind of fell out of digital artworks because there's so many issues with technical problems. And I mean, like maybe going back to what you were saying earlier, I think one of the biggest issues I had was the privilege of digital work. So after kind of doing a bit of research and being for a project I was doing, I found out that only 35% of the world use internet. So this was a revelation for me. I was like, holy shit, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So if I, as a sort of let's not say partisan, but like a kind of revolutionary kind of thinker, where I feel that I need to connect to people in a much wider sphere than that's possible, as much as possible. If I cannot connect to those people, my artwork has no meaning.
Yeah.
You know, so we have 65% of the world who cannot access that work.
Yeah.
And this was something for me that was very difficult to deal with, and I kind of went into a different direction. But at the same time, we have this work is not just a digital work. You know, because it's not just thinking in terms of digitality and okay, I have to get my artwork to the public.
Yeah.
You have a very solid conceptual idea in the background, and the best way to deal with it across borders has been to create a digital artwork. You know, it's not something that you've come to from the other direction. And this is, of course, because of the way you've created it, you could also make it on paper.
Yes.
You know, you could just go to people and ask them, could you fill out this form and questionnaire? I'm dealing with these issues. So it doesn't really need that digital aspect of thing to survive as a good artwork, I think. I think that's really kind of important to deal with when you deal with digital creativity, is that, like you said, is that where are the boundaries of this creativity versus digital versus non-digital? And can we cross those disciplines easy or not? And I think this work is something that could, you know, easily cross that, because it's not tied to simply the bit rate or the sort of informational aspect of digitality that requires a data bank and a server and
Fair enough. No, I mean, yes, I do agree. The project could have been done as a paper survey as well.
Yeah, but I mean, as an idea.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it wouldn't have been the same thing, but it could have been done. So that, of course, is there. But then the question of the word digital is also that, okay, now we already live in a world that has been we are in a post-digital world. So, and for me, that also means that we can't really go back into a world that is pre-digital. Even if tomorrow the internet shut down and there was no online anymore, we will still continue to operate from the position of having known the internet and having known what the internet did or does, what were its pitfalls and potentials, and so we can never actually get rid of that information. There's no unlearning that is possible. So even to do a paper project today is for me still a post-internet or a post-digital work.
Sure.
And then to think about it from the position of you spoke about, you actually made a lot of things I wanted to respond to. You said a lot of things I wanted to respond to. Let's see if I can get through all of it. So you talked about then what does it mean for this question of access or privilege? Yeah. Now the thing is that also when we are doing anything that is physical, like for example a painting, most physical thing, how many people really see it? What is our audience and what is our outreach? Is still a very specific select number of people.
Sure.
I think for me, what really appeals to me when I think of the online as a space is the potential of not just the present audience but the future audience. Not to say that the digital is forever and that it will exist in perpetuity, but maybe this is where I can talk about this one particular project that I've been very influenced by. It's called PARI, which is the People's Archive of Rural India. It is a project that began in India as a way to say that when we are talking about the People's Archive, and especially in a place like India, the archive actually is everywhere around us, because there are people doing intricate work on the street. They are doing different kind of things in shops on street level. So the idea of museums holding culture is less prominent than the streets holding culture. So in that sense, there is a certain amount of culture that is present all around us in India, but at the same time, the modes of education about that culture and the transmission of that knowledge is very limited. And non-internet based education is actually much more difficult to provide than saying that okay, we use something which is the internet and which is not great right now, but it's only going to get better, and so things on the internet are textbooks of the future, and then to build archives that are textbooks of the future. And they've been operating for the last 6-7 years, documenting a lot of history and culture of people in rural India, which is not of interest for most people to document otherwise. So neither newspapers, nor journals, nor museums, nor the government are really interested in documenting the culture and history of people who are traditionally marginalized. So then the internet also becomes in a way a tool for then documenting and archiving that which is not desirable. And so in that sense, a subject like violence, which is a very abject subject, it's not really a desirable subject. Nobody wants to talk about violence, or nobody enjoys thinking about it. But I think what is important then is to talk about it from a position of how to counter it. And in a way, doing an online project becomes relatively easier, but not really easier, than a paper-based project, because you know that okay, there's a certain system that you're creating which will continue to operate and function on its own after a point of time.
And it's much less confrontational.
Yes.
Even though when you were giving this walkthrough through the website, one of the things I was thinking is that what is the violence of data? You know, how does this abstract form of stuff have violence? Does it have this? What do you think? What is the violence of data?
Well, of course there is I'm not sure if I really understand if there is violence inherent in data or how we use it. And the counter to the fact that data can be used in ways that are violent is not necessarily digital data. It's also all data.
Anything can be instrumentalized in that
exactly.
sense.
And I think that's also maybe an important thing to now start thinking about data, not just from this position of, oh, it's this inaccessible, unapproachable thing that is in the form of bits and bytes and gigabytes, but also that data that data has existed since we have understood any form of system. So we don't think of knowledge and information and wisdom. We don't approach these words with the same apprehension as we do data. But there is also now this question that, okay, if we are talking about violence that can be committed in the name of data, not having data is also, or not having data that has a certain integrity is also violent. Because we're not only living in a data-fied world, we are living in a world where we are aware of the data that we generate. We always have data. So what we see, what we process, what our senses process, the languages we have created, and the way we communicate, all of that has been data. But we are now aware that it is all data. Absolutely. And that is the difference.
That's very interesting, because I wrote some notes during the walkthrough, and one of them was that there is definitely a kind of perception of markers, which is what I wrote down as in the work, that you are perceiving something, and I really kind of felt curious about your ideas about maybe not just between sensory and perception, but what is the perception of the marks? Because what you're doing is, what it seems to me the website is doing is that it's kind of marking something, and you have these markers of various categories, kind of like cascading into the final outcome, which is the color. And all these markers mean something. They have their own significances and symbols and so forth. But there is this perception that we are looking at a mark of something, whether it's a mark of violence or dominance or not, is maybe it's important, but maybe in the terms of perception, not. But I found it very hard to turn it into a question, because how do we perceive these marks, and how would you say that the artwork, how does not just how does the audience perceive the work, but what is it that the perception of these marks and these making of these categories means for you?
Well, I honestly, the aim or the way the collection of these questions actually started was in trying to also think about what constitutes identity. And if we are saying that the color of violence is unique to each and every individual, how do we then say that this is what an individual represents? That how can then the color become a data set? Because it is a data set. When you make a choice and you say that, okay, this is the color of violence, there are so many different processes that and reactions, chemical reactions, biological reactions, that actually have led you to this point to say that, okay, this is a color of violence. And now, I mean, it's not about the color of violence as a question per se, but any choice that we make actually is a culmination of several decisions, experiences, being. A lot of the things that go into our being in these very small everyday events actually lead us to be who we are, and who we are then makes a decision. So to simplify that process, I said that, okay, we will say that there are certain questions that bureaucracies and governments define as being important to understand a person, but in relation to the different contexts of identity. So whether it's a bank wanting you to know who you are so that it gives you a bank account or a loan or any kind of a service, or visa officer wants to know who you are before he says or she says or they say that we give you a visa. So these are all methods that we have understood, and maybe these are not the right questions that create a person's identity. Maybe in another week or month or year or 10 years we will know what really it means for a person to say that this is who I am. But at least right now these are the kind of questions that we are all confronted with. So the idea was to create a data set of these informations for them to say that okay, this is what the color represents, and none of it is made public. It's essentially then a performance between the website and you as a participant.
Yeah.
So it's this very one-on-one solitary negotiation of questions and answers, and it's navigating this space for oneself. And so that is one aspect of the performance or the performative element of this archive. But then it is also to say that these are questions that, at least to me, are indicative of those markers that come up as being violent. So religion or the question of religion or specific being part of a specific religion or not has become a question of violence. Having a certain education or being able to do something or not has become a question of violence. So the idea was also then to walk the participant through these questions and to sensitize them or facilitate, actually not to do it, because I really don't do anything in this experience of the participant and the project. It's to create the conditions for that sensitization.
Yeah.
So how can I create those conditions to make you think that okay, this is what violence is. This is a way in which violence can be understood, or this question is violent.
Yeah.
And so then finally,
some of the questions are quite violent, and they are pushy, and that's why the word mark was very strong with me, because I feel like I'm marking myself with violence while I fill this questionnaire, and slowly by accumulating these marks I come to understand that actually this website is, I wouldn't say it's manipulative, maybe that's not the right word, but it's definitely trying to guide me, let's say, more like a guide rather than manipulation, because but that's really a danger with digital creativity, is always manipulating people, because you're so in control of their perceptions. And but these markers really took me kind of into a place where I started thinking about the way in which all of these questions are quite violent, in more or less, but then now that when you were talking, I started thinking that maybe it's really these questions really aren't the way to do with identity, because who you are necessarily isn't what you look like, or anything. Any information about you might just be wrong according to you. This is something I find very difficult. And sorry, I kind of rambled off to a different direction, but I really like what you were saying. But it really kind of makes me think, again, these notes I made is quite useful, because it makes me really think of what does it really mean when we use words? Because these markers they're always constructed through this sort of very formal language.
Yeah, and one of the way in which the project is violent is that it is in English. That is also a form of epistemological violence. So if I have funding in the future, the aim is to translate it into as many languages as possible, starting with languages that are spoken by the most number of people. So moving from the English to Arabic, Chinese, Hindi, Bengali, Finnish, because we are in Finland, so that has a special. It's bumped up the ladder.
Finnish is interesting. I find myself thinking a lot about Finnish recently, because I've been thinking about language, and I started reading Pasolini's books, and he talks about the relationship of Friuli to Italian, and how there's not there's no national Italian. Like this is his argument in one of his essays, is that there's no national language which we can call Italian, but it's all these dialects.
Right.
And the world is full of dialects.
Yeah.
We have this sort of, everything is dialectical instead of national. And I thought Finland has a very similar relationship to language, I feel, because we have this written language and then we have the spoken language, which aren't related in any way, except through the bourgeois, which is what Pasolini is arguing. The same thing in Italian is that the bourgeois minds and the sort of collective forced education on people make people use colloquial languages the same way they use written languages. And this for him is some sort of problem because it negates the idea of a unified language that everybody can understand properly, I think. Maybe, I'm not sure if that's the right interpretation of his essay. I was just reading it this morning. But I think Finland has this very similar thing, which is why it would be interesting to see this also in Finnish. I mean, not just because, but I think there's a Finnish mentality that would really kind of maybe work in this context.
Yeah, and I mean, it's also then, like for me, it's also very fascinating when I think about language, the fact that all language is constructed, and then so are all other markers of identity.
Absolutely.
Or all other markers with which we start creating a certain kind of an affiliation with. Let's not say identity, because that could be a too strong a word for many things, but we start creating alliances and affiliations with certain idea. But all said and done, I think most of our world is constructed through the process of languages and these ideas that they accompany. So like for me, I think there would be also a very fundamental shift in then how do we talk about a lot of these things when language changes, because what would then it mean to talk about certain concepts in a different language where the words for those concepts actually do not exist, or there is no
usually
parallel.
Usually it becomes this very violent process of adapting them from other languages in order to accommodate them, rather than making new words or something.
True.
I mean, one thing that I've been paying attention to for a long time in digital, especially digital environments, is the formation of new symbolic meanings. And I really like the idea of the way in which digital platforms, especially social media and places where you can interact, create linguistic forms which are not verbal, you know. So, or they're combinatory. Let's say I would say this, that they start to enmesh and entangle all the perceptions, all the senses into one single sort of concept. Let's say. So you would have you can start to construct emoticons are something like this, where image is also a word, you know. And the way in which the internet works is that you start having images, colors, sound, video, but they all converge in a way which means one thing. You can start creating concepts and conceptualize the world through these combinations rather than through written word. And I'm kind of in that sense, when I look at your website from this perspective, there's something about the way the colors themselves appear and the words that gives me something. I'm not sure, like, it's hard to describe what I mean because I cannot say it, you know. So for me, the idea of these colors and the words interacting, and also these numbers, which have their own significances, this to me is very fascinating. And it's a really simple, kind of almost banal thing to say.
But maybe I can pick up on what you talked about in the context of social media, and social media actually becoming then this space for co-creating certain social concepts, like emoji as a language, which has its roots in pictograms and another kind of a logic of language altogether, which we're now in a way rediscovering very casually through a process of co-creating. So I think with social media it is also that it's not just about digital and an online space, but it is also about creating another kind of community, and most of the conversation against people being online for so long is that, oh, but people are then not spending time with real people physically, having these meaningful dialogues, and the social media is almost seen as this less meaningful space, which is a very popular idea, sure, but I'm not sure if it is truly something where people find less meaning in online communities. And as a gamer, I think you may agree.
But I definitely disagree with this idea. I've always found social media and especially online communities very interesting and social in a way that's not necessarily available everywhere. I mean, especially being part of some minorities and these things. Social media can give a place where you can be yourself in a very different way, where you don't really kind of have to deal with the social problems that emerge.
Exactly.
For example, for coming out as trans or something, where these things have real physical consequences that can break families, that can have.
And I've been very interested in the idea of cyberspace and the early years of the internet, where the idea of the internet was actually not necessarily just an escape, but as a digital frontier, as a space. And by cyber, I don't think it had the same connotation as now we have even with virtual. It was a very real space where the rules and the logics of physics and biology and politics didn't necessarily have to continue over to this new space. And a lot of the early cyberspace spaces actually defy most rules that we are bound by in physical spaces. So social laws, social rules, and in a way it's also then a question of then language right there, because it is all coded, and code is a language. And why is code interesting is because where with language we didn't really know, or we weren't aware of what we were doing, that we were actually creating a certain kind of a conceptual syntax in which to operate from. When code was being created, they were very aware of that. So they were very aware of what it is that they were building. And so, in a way, it has similarity to, say, languages like Esperanto, which were also constructed specifically to be these unifying languages. So, in a way, code is meant to be unifying, and it has a certain vocabulary, which is again what is happening with the color. So, on one hand, there is this questionnaire and participation, but then what is happening at the end of it is this archive of colors, which is there is no way that it is being created without an awareness of what is being asked, because it is what, according to you, is the color of violence. So then how do we look at it from the position of then creating a new vocabulary for color, which is then, you know, moving forward from the simplistic notions of color theory and psychological color associations that we've had carried for a number of decades now. And in a way, what is simply seeing these 200, more than 200 colors being all colors of violence do to you as a viewer when you see that it's so varied, that that it's completely moved away from this perceived idea of, okay, this for violence and this for peace and this for harmony and this for nature and so on and so forth, as concepts that we've kind of lived through for such a long time that they become normalized, and for most people who see it or see the range of colors, they're always surprised. So it's very interesting for me, at least now, having done it, and I can be a viewer to the viewers. It's very interesting for me to kind of see how people react to the project in different ways.
Yeah. Let's just take a look if we have any questions anywhere.
Yes.
While we're talking about observing the audience.
Yeah.
If we have. No?
But we have a person.
There is a
that
person. That's true. That's true. Do you have any questions? No questions then. At least on the digital work is actually, I mean, maybe that's why they talk about disruption so much, because you have to, if you do everything, you're going to have to disrupt yourself many times in order to go forward. As silly as that sounds.
Well, that's.
So here we are scrolling the videos. Yeah. Well, no questions so far. But yeah, I think we've had a good conversation. I don't. I think I had some points which I think I kind of forgot now about something you were saying earlier. Let me see if I wrote it down. Yeah, because we've kind of like been skirting around the work, but maybe I don't know. I think we went through a lot of things.
Yeah.
And I think we've been talking for about 45 minutes.
Okay.
Would you like to continue, or maybe if we have more ideas? Because it's not really been an interview, let's say.
No. Yeah. No, but I'm also like maybe I should have right at the beginning, but maybe I can say thank you for speaking to me and asking these questions.
I'm happy to be here with you, and it's really great to have you here, because this is really, I think it's such a topical theme right now, that we have this forced digital world coming to us, and sort of out of, I mean, when we started talking about the exhibition, we didn't know anything about coronavirus, and you kind of went through some phases to get to this exhibition, but at the same time it was kind of like an accident.
Yeah.
That they coincided.
Yes.
You know, I mean, you've been doing this project for quite a while, and it kind of coincided, and that's really interesting. And now I actually remembered what I wanted to say. It was to do with the sociality of social media and these games, because one of the things that, I mean, this argument that social medias are too isolating, that they're not real they're not real contact with people. And now that this coronavirus has forced me to be in my house and maybe it's forced my social contacts to remain in a certain sphere, I've noticed that video games for me have become a place where I can isolate. So rather than being at my studio, working on art and being alone and finding my own thoughts within that, or finding them in writing, I've been finding them in video games. And this has been really an interesting thing. So it goes against all of this idea that sociality, but really like being alone, playing a video game where in the video game I can go and be alone and be by myself and not have anybody around me in the game or at home. And I've been playing at night, so I'm currently in this mode where I'm not really sleeping at night, I'm sleeping during the days. So I'm kind of like spending my nights kind of thinking and being in these worlds by myself, and finding it really refreshing not to be on Facebook scrolling the messages of people, seeing the news and the information which I can see, but then to have these discussions with the people who participate in these games that are kind of like between the reality and the dream. So we're in this sort of world where where the episteme is kind of emerging. And I really, that was actually a term I wanted to come back to, because you talked about sort of epistemic violence. What does that mean? You know, this is quite a personal question, because it's something, epistemic things are very interesting to me. But I kind of like caught on that, and maybe we can return to it a bit.
Well, we were talking about it in the context of language, and of course, what I meant was that. And specifically in the fact that the project is in English, and that languages also have power. Some languages are epistemically perceived to be more powerful or have power because of the usage. I mean, and we were talking about how it would be interesting in the context of being translated to Finnish. But I was also thinking that, okay, for us in India, where there are over 750 languages, the idea of having certain languages is also a colonial gift.
Of course.
So in India, the variation of dialects actually can be from one village to another. You would have a completely different dialect, and it can be that quickly changing. And for anyone or for any organization, for any bureaucratic system to then archive those 22,000 dialects was nearly impossible. So they said, okay, we will say that there are 600 languages and everything else is just dialects of that, and forget about it. So from 22,000 we went to 600, and this was, I think, in late 1800s. And then in 1930s, when there was another census happening, the British government at that point in time said that, okay, even 600 languages is too much, so we will cut it down to 22 languages and everything else is dialect. So we have now 22 official languages of India, which we concretize also then in post-independent India, and it has continued. But the fact of the matter is that for many people who speak, say, specific languages, the idea of saying that, okay, this entire region speaks Marathi or Bengali or Hindi is ridiculous, because they speak a particular language that nobody else outside of the village speaks. There are some languages that only 5 people speak, but it's still legitimate. So the legitimacy of languages, although they ought to be self-evident, where epistemic violence comes into the equation is when it doesn't. There's a major conversation going on about Hindi being the national language of India, which there's no national language in India, again because there's such a strong variety, and the fact that for many people in India, they don't speak Hindi, so it's not like a universally spoken language all across India. It's spoken by the North Indians primarily. So there is also then a kind of oppression of language there, and then English or French having a certain kind of weightage, where for most urban Indians or rich urban Indian kids, going to a school or where the mode of education is in English is a matter of prestige. So there's a social stratification as well. So to not study in an English language school is problematic. And then you would of course aspire to go outside of India and to live or settle down or work. So you then need to learn either German or French, and learning Marathi or Sanskrit or any of that is not cool. So so then it of course then there is this entire gamut in the context of language, but it can be easily extrapolated into any of the questions that I'm asking. So it can be extrapolated in the question of gender, sexuality, and so for me, all of these are also epistemic violences. The normalization of any one thing, whether it is heteronormativity or whether it is normativity of religion. And that's another thing that in India at least for me, it was a matter of great pride that we didn't have a national religion, but we were a secular country, which is not the case in many countries around the world. And so it's quite a shock to me and for a lot of Indians to be in a position where we have to defend that secularism as opposed to this very right-wing Hindutva ideology that is being that's actually gaining traction and popularity of India being a Hindu nation. I mean, for a lot of us, it is quite ridiculous, but we're the minority. So then that also is epistemic for me.
Yeah, definitely. This is the sort of event that cannot happen in live streams.
Yeah.
I mean, the problem I'm having is that while I like to talk, I also like to think, and then you need to keep up a pace of delivery to keep an audience interested. And at the same time, I want to say this out loud because I want to also subvert and disrupt it, because I don't think we should be behaving in the way that digital the streamlined kind of commercial digital activities ask us to behave. I mean, one thing when the digital all these streams started was that somebody said that actually it was this guy Rag Martin, who runs the Hyperlogic website. He said that a lot of the people come back to digital content not because it's good content, but because of the way it's presented is interesting. And if you look at YouTube videos, this is you can really see it, because YouTube videos require editing. Like, to have a video where you just sit and talk is not going to be popular. You need a tune, you need a start, you need this introduction, you need moving images, you need multiple screens flying around, and these people find it entertaining enough for them to consider the content. And you can see it even when the content is great. You can see that they're still doing this type of sort of structural video editing in order to keep you coming back for the funny little things that are in the videos. And this in a way seems to me like the kind of language that we're creating on top of the languages that we use, is that we're starting to use these sort of moving images. Does it matter if the image is on the left or the right? Yeah, it does. It might not seem obvious to everybody, but it really kind of matters if one thing is here or there, because it's kind of still on the page. And the way you read things is always related to the sort of screen.
Oh, and I mean, this question of aesthetics is also something.
That's actually something we didn't touch upon. Because the aesthetic of your work is quite minimal, let's say. I was going to say harsh, because that's the content speaking to me. But it's not this sort of floristic, there's not a lot of patterns, for example. Or the patterns are created through the interaction, which isn't finished. And I think actually maybe that's something I feel more strong about than the aesthetics, is that how digital creativity enables works that are not ever over. And I like that. I really like, maybe it's an aesthetic that you have this thing where the work is never finished, or it doesn't need to be finished. There's no kind of end in sight.
One thing that you would find me crying about is that I always get into projects that are these ongoing projects which never get over. So it's not like, okay, I can do a project and then it's over and then I start with another project. It's not like that. It's, okay, I'm doing a project and it's going on, and then I have to start another one because we can't just do one project in our lives, so then I have two, and slowly it accumulates. So now I'm working with these accumulations of multiple projects that I have to move forward with continuously. But in a way, that's what
you know, like a lot of your projects seem to be related to each other in some ways. They're kind of dealing with different facets of similar ideas.
Yeah, but then the question also is that, okay, how does one say that, okay, but this project is about this, so let's keep that outside for now, and it's related, yes, but this is doing just this. It becomes a bit difficult sometimes.
But isn't that really about, that to me that seems really about the museums and the curators and the sort of ways in which your projects are put somewhere else. Because for you it's probably not such a great problem to have similar themes come into works and whatever.
No.
But I know that for an institution that's looking for exhibitions or looking for work, for them the separation of these things matters.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's something that maybe that could be something we talk about now, and since I think we should probably be finishing fairly soonish, that we can end in this sort of look at the institutional ways in which they don't support us. They don't support digital. I feel at least that a lot of digital creativity is lost because of the way in which institutions are not able to handle it.
Yeah.
You know, they don't have the technical expertise. You need to essentially solve their problems for them.
Yes.
And this, of course, becomes very frustrating for an artist if you have to be if the institution puts you in a situation where you're solving structural issues related to the work or like communication problems that it's really their job to do. And of course, how do we then, is there some sort of training program we should invent for?
Definitely, yes. I think a lot of artists who are working with these complex hardware, software related projects, I think yes, it can be extremely frustrating, but I think for a lot of artists, they've made their peace with the fact that this is part of a certain communication strategy or part of the conversation that, okay, say, this is what my work is about, and this is what I will need for it, and then this is how it will happen, and this is how it needs to be installed. I mean, I've had the opportunity to look at some artists' installation riders, and they're so particular about the fact that, okay, the projector needs to be placed at a certain distance, and then it has to actually have a certain screen size, but at a certain resolution, and so therefore you need to use these projectors and things like that. I think it's also it's a conversation, or it's maybe required also because the nature of the work changes so easily with the changing material. I mean, in a way, here, for example, the projectors and the computer and the mouse and the microphone, cameras are as much part of the material and the materiality of the exhibition as is the online project as well. So when you're thinking about online work, it's quite possible for people to forget about the fact that there is a very strong tangible material component to it as well, and that it's not about just this ephemeral space that we are engaging with. I mean, of course there's that, but it's always in juxtaposition or always in this very strong connection to physical material.
Absolutely.
And sometimes the physical, like for me, the physical material that we're surrounded by here is definitely much more material than paper and ink and canvas or paint. So, or performance, where now I've started thinking about even this as having a certain kind of performativity. Like I spoke about how the experience of you participating is a performance between you and the project. So there is of course that part of it, but also the fact that over 200 people have submitted the colors, is a kind of a networked performance or a cyber performance of sorts, and that's also something that I've been very interested, or at least I've gotten interested in thinking about that further.
Yeah. I mean, for us as an institution, presenting this work maybe was a bit easy in the sense that we are, I've dealt with digital work before, and I've worked digitally, but it's just, I kind of want to talk about this because I was recently in a situation where a digital artwork that I was making was not understood in an institutional context. And this made me really think about, especially with the coronavirus happening at that moment, was that we had it was not in Finland, but the country became went into lockdown, and we had this digital work that could have easily been presented to everybody, but the exhibition was postponed or cancelled, and a big mess, you know. And it kind of really made me think about the ways in which these institutions actually think about digital artworks. Like, what is it actually that they think these artworks are, or what they do, or how they work? When you have a situation where somebody is so ignorant, perhaps, of the way the digital world works, that it's not somehow considered usable, you know, in this situation, it becomes problematic. And it seems to me like many of the times, a lot of digital artworks fail institutionally because the institutions are not able to adapt to the way the artwork itself works. So I don't know. This, to me, it's kind of like a personal reflection on the idea that we are an institution, but also other institutions might struggle with the idea of digital works. I mean, we have this, like you said, this idea of immateriality and ephemerality and so forth. Which many people do have, but it's a total fantasy. I mean, it's such a fantasy that I think it's actually a bit damaging to the art world and these places, because, I mean, I don't know, maybe I mentioned this somewhere else, but in around 2013, 2014, I started this group, or like an online project called Internet Workers Union, because I thought, like, labor unions and labor, and digital labor, we had massive discussions about digital labor and what is digital labor. And the interesting thing, kind of what I wanted to bring, was that we shifted over the phase of like 2 years, during which like Facebook, wages for Facebook started happening. I created this, the Global Internet Workers Union, and all these projects were kind of ongoing. We went from the idea of immaterial labor, which is a digital humanities concept, to get rid of, we got rid of that and went into material labor. So we dropped the immaterial, the ephemeral part, because we realized that it's all connected to infrastructure. So it's all physical, it's all material, there's always somebody working on it, there's always somebody, it's just not visible. So there's this problem of visibility and how much of the world is dominated by the ocular-centric view of you must see it, or you must touch it, or it must be here in the space for me to believe that it's a physical object. Whereas we have cables that connect all these objects together in a very quick way. And even that's been buffered and faked. You know, if you have, for example, conference calls are a great example, because we think they're fast and we think they're live, but in reality there's a buffer. There's always this seconds. It records you and then it plays it to everybody in this sort of weird sense, and this gives you a sort of feeling that you are actually talking live, but it's never really there. You know? And this is, but it's weird, to me it's always fascinatingly strange that institutions then don't have this expertise, and that they look for young artists, or they look for artists dealing with digital works kind of in a way where they want to learn from them some basic internet skills, not like artworks, not like the, I mean, are you afraid that, I mean, this is kind of like a question I just rambled into, but are you afraid that this artwork that you're making, which is a massive digital platform, and the other artworks that you've made, are kind of disrupted or taken away from the entanglement that you've put them into and just seen as digital works or something digital that we can kind of, oh, this is something that you made, or this is how it works, rather than seeing it as a sort of full, in-depth, complex artwork.
This is an entire conversation in itself, but okay. First, yes, I mean, I think I was very lucky to actually have been working with both you and Egle in setting up the exhibition, because I have been told that, oh, but your project sounds so complicated, I don't think we have the technical expertise to carry it out. There have been many times people have not understood what it means for a project to exist online, to exist in perpetuity, to say that that since the time that it was first put online, it is actually constantly in exhibition, and to have physical exhibitions are a way for people to gather. So the gatherings for us to do more than just what the project does in online spaces, because it's actually being exhibited since 2016. So these are also very complicated, and they're very simple, so they're not complex, but they're complicated for people to wrap their heads around, and especially because of the ways in which, and when you say institutions, you are putting Myymälä in you're saying that Myymälä is also an institution, but then I think it is a very different kind of an institution.
Sure.
But when you say institutions, most institutions actually are operating from this position of what is marketable and what has a market, what there is a market. And unfortunately, what has happened, because of the strengths of the internet that artists have played upon, of it to be accessible and free and open access, that there is less of a market for. I mean, there is nothing exclusive about a website.
It's pretty banal in a way.
Exactly. No, exclusive in the sense of it being exclusive in a way a painting is exclusive.
Sure.
So for a museum, a painting is definitely much more marketable than a website or any kind of an online experience. But that's, I suppose, the trade-off that when we work with digital and online spaces, we know that, hey, it's not going to get into that kind of exclusive space. It's not going to get. So I think for a lot of media artists, there is also a shift where they don't consider themselves to be contemporary artists. So for them, contemporary art is another world, and media art is another world. So there will be actually very few artists who try and navigate or straddle both these worlds, saying that, hey, media art is also part of contemporary art, and actually the medium is the most relevant medium, so why should we be working with something that is irrelevant just because it's not going to be acceptable? So I mean, there is that one aspect of it, but also I think there's this thing that media art is also actually straddling this very awkward position between media as entertainment, which is, you know, what we talked about even with YouTube videos, that they're very finished, polished, edited, dressed up things intended to entertain and to create, generate this eyeball economy, which media art or these kind of projects aren't really designed to be popular. They're designed to be critical. And critical and popular generally are pretty contrasting. Like a lot of people ask me, hey, why do you need to have so many questions? Why can't you just have what's your color of violence and then be done with it? I would participate. It take me 2 minutes and you can move forward. But that's not the point. So if the point is to actually make it difficult and that's not something that is going to be very easily or very quickly appreciated. Given the times that we are living in, given the fact that people want very quickly digestible bits of information or entertainment or even as artwork to be very quick and easy to understand. And
well, paintings are, I mean, not easy to understand, but they're definitely quick to consume.
yeah,
Like you can look at 1,000 paintings in a day easily.
yeah.
All you have to do is click a button or go through a museum
And which is exactly what makes archives to be very interesting, is that actually you get to wallow in them, you spend time, you play around, you try different combinations. It's not like, for me, from my earlier practice of making images to now doing this, what is actually interesting is the way in which I can engage with this
the
so
material.
differently, even as an audience.
No, but that's really interesting. It's really fascinating because I think a lot of the time you feel as an artist or as a cultural worker or a critic, you feel that people should be engaging with the digital work should be easily. It should be easy for people to engage with digital work because it's so like everywhere.
Yeah.
You know, everybody uses it. At least in Finland, it's like it's everybody. You know, it's a human right to have internet. But at the same time, it's strange that people don't have the patience to engage with difficult digital works. Like, you kind of get tired of it faster because you're so used to it. And this feels like a paradox for some reason. And that's kind of, that's what I kind of thought when what you were saying. And it made me think of this, going back to some games, it made me think of this Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy game, which is a text-based game, and you have to write the story.
Yeah.
And you kind of, when you cannot, you go like, shit, like, I want to leave. Because this is making me not frustrated, but maybe that's that frustration of not being able to get the technology to work is also related to the way in which people consume or at least view or experience digital artworks.
Yeah. And
which shouldn't be the case because that frustration is not related to the artwork. I mean, the artwork itself can be frustrating. I mean, definitely there are digital artworks which are frustrating. But I mean, that can be part of the artwork. It's not, I mean, that we kind of feel that we should negate those emotions and kind of not accept them as things that we can experience when looking at art is a bit strange, considering all the art that has come before. You know? But it has to be streamlined. Like streamlined art sounds very bad.
And I mean, you would find most media art is still confined to the realm of photography and video, because at least there has been sufficient headway into this idea that there needs to be some engagement. So like if there's a 40-minute video, you need to at least spend 40 minutes in seeing it. I think with something like this, there's no encapsulated time that is made pleasant. So I think what could happen is that people don't know. Like for example, now it's become a trend for most. I don't know if you noticed this, but for most news sites, articles are no longer. The length of the article is no longer in characters or words or pages, it's in how much time it will require. So it's a 5-minute article, it's a 3-minute article, it's a 15-minute article. So it's almost giving a certain kind of indication of time to be invested.
Yes.
So I think where media or where digital works, where they cannot give that indication, they do become difficult automatically. Second is, I think it's also for a lot of media artworks that are not, or digital artworks that are not video and photography based, are also those works where there is no narrative, and we're so used to narrative. But the beauty of a work like this, or a lot of digital work, is that it is so embedded into this idea of the database, which actually has no narrative. And the idea is that you will create your own narrative yourself. These are just the tools for the narrative, or as I said before, the conditions to participate. That in itself, I think, also becomes difficult, especially where everything is narrativized and the social media stream has created narrative by stating that, hey, by using our algorithm, we actually will personalize the content for you, so everything that you see is actually you. So already, without there being a narrative, there's already a narrative of saying that, okay, this is what you represent and what represents you. This doesn't make that claim. So in many ways, I think it's also counter to the easy or the ways in which media consumption has been made easy by corporations and social media giants and ways in which we have actually learned to create content, which is so learned to create content for consumption, and ways in which we have learned to consume content is part of this very unspoken taught. We've learned it. But
like anthropologically.
But I think projects like this are trying to counter it, so then it becomes difficult.
And it makes you realize and notice it and start to think about those things, because they are also important.
Like, for example, one thing that is a very important part of the project is the fact that these questions are also questions that are the questions that are being asked in the questionnaire. These are also big data questions. But the thing is that most big data systems now have evolved to a point where they don't need to directly ask you these questions. So you can just link your whatever online form to your Facebook, Google, or Instagram, and data is automatically transferred. So a lot of the name, age, password kind of things you don't need to do anymore. And then things like skin tone. Nobody's going to ask you your skin tone. They're going to just look at photographs that you have put in your profile, match the tags, see, okay, if it's your account, and okay, what images are tagged as being Timo, and then pick your skin tone from the images and say that, okay, you're from Finland, so you have a certain ethnicity, and it's done. So you're not being asked most of these questions. The data is just being processed out of the material that, but so it becomes difficult for people to be confronted with these as questions. So I was speaking to this person, Samir Pitalwala, who is a big data theorist and a big data scientist in India, and he said why your questionnaire is so difficult is because you are giving people the option of answering or not answering them. Most big data companies are not giving people the option anymore. So because you're giving them the option, now they're having to exercise that choice.
Absolutely. And that makes me think of the amount of contracts. Like, we've been normalized through social media contracts into clicking yes to everything. And nobody ever reads those things.
Which is why actually when I started with the terms and conditions part of the project, it was intended to be
quite
outrageous.
It's quite an extensive terms and conditions. For a sort of web project. I mean, it's the most I've ever seen, besides like some contracts. I mean, but like as an artwork, I mean, you've really kind of delved into these things. Obviously.
And that was also because I, at some point in time, started becoming very interested in what does it mean for governments and bureaucracies and corporations to be asking for this data, and artist project to be asking for this data, and then where does their complicity and their obligation end, and what are the limitations of my liability. And so it also then became a kind of a comparative between these two positions of hegemonic power and grassroots level, counter questioning.
But also informing yourself about what it means.
Yes.
Because these things, like I've had for a few years now, I've had a policy of reading through contracts. So I try not to say click yes. And I've tried to, for example, I've tried to read through Facebook's terms and conditions. All of it I've tried to read. And then this is like a big maze. Google is the same. It's like a maze. They've created this sort of multiplicity of directions you can go into, and you're never quite sure if you've read it all. Which is really frustrating. And it's like it's intentionally making this situation of not exactly violence, but a kind of informality of legality that must lead to some place. It must have some consequences that we think that, like, I have a contract with Google, I'm in a contract with the biggest companies in the world.
Yes.
And what does that mean to us? This is a ridiculous statement to make, that I have a contract with Google. If I went outside and I have a contract with Virgin Air, everybody would just laugh at me, but I probably do. You know what I mean?
And that is actually when the whole Cambridge Analytica thing happened. The problem was not simply that they did what they did. The problem was that we didn't actually have a law or any kind of a system in place to check what they did and whether that was right or wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now hopefully we do. But the thing is that what you said is absolutely right. We basically shrug it off as one of the inevitabilities of our way of life today, or data theft is also shrugged off as okay. But maybe what I have is not that important, so it doesn't matter. But it does matter at the end of the day, and so that is.
These companies rely on it for their income,
exactly.
So for them it's really important that you give this information.
No, and also that there are very, very strong real world implications to the data being given away.
Absolutely. So maybe there is a type of violence also inherent in data. At the same time, I kind of wanted to, because that's what I was.
No,
I
it's
thought.
usage.
Yeah. No, but it can be. I keep on coming to this because I'm not a Hegelian in the sense that I want a synthesis. I think like the idea that data can be violent, but it can also not be violent. It can exist in the same thing at the same time. It doesn't. For me, it's not a compulsory issue that requires it to be either or. So what is the violence of data can mean that there is a violence inherent in data that I can accept, but it doesn't. It's like it doesn't negate every other thing that the data can have. Like humans can be violent, but it doesn't mean that we're necessarily also always just that violence, or that we're not also nice sometimes. Unless we're anyway. But so maybe in conclude, let's start to conclude now. The third time, maybe that's enough. Thanks for this conversation. It's been great to have you here. Thanks for everybody on watching, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and come to our Facebook and ask questions and talk to us and let us know everything you want from us, and we will try to do it, maybe, or not. But we'll definitely be nice to you and enjoy. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye.
And thanks to Ali.